the second day. We have, I just wanted to inform colleagues that our Zoom is going to be live streamed on Facebook, on YouTube, sorry, for any other colleagues that would want to join on that side. Metzing, just housekeeping, are all our speakers online?
Yes, everybody's online.
All right. Colleagues, welcome once again to our second Family Week series, and hopefully this is our last fully virtual, and then in 2023 we are hoping to have a hybrid session. I'm going to hand over to our Director of CGE, Mr. Leolin Jackson. Before he starts, allow me to just give you a synopsis of who the Director of Center for Global Engagement is and his wealth of experience. One moment, colleagues. Mr. Leolin Jackson has been in the higher education sector for more than 30 years as a senior lecturer, head of student enrollment, director of Southern African Nordic Center, SANOD, and he was also director of the International Relations Office at the University of Western Cape, UWC. Leolin served as a member of the UWC Executive Management Committee, a senator, a chair of the Senate International Relations Committee. During his tenure, he also helped facilitate successfully running of the musical Mama Africa, the musical, as one of the executive producers. He is currently employed as the director for Center for Global Engagement at the Central University of Technology, Free State, and is a senator, a Senate executive member, and a member of Senate subcommittees, the University Internationalization Committee, the University Teaching and Learning Committee. In addition, his office also manages various EU and other global funding agency projects. He serves on the National Directors Forum of the International Education Association, South Africa, AISA, and he is the immediate past president of AISA 2017 to 2018. Leolin is a member of various global networks and organizations such as Association of International Education Administrators, AIEA, the African Network for Internationalization of Education, ANI, the Asia Pacific Association for International Education, APAI, the European Association for International Education, EIAE, and NAFSA, Association of International Educators. His research interests focus on comprehensive internationalization of higher education. With that beautiful, extensive, long, very experienced bio, allow me to introduce our Director of Center for Global Engagement. He will be doing our introduction and recap of yesterday and also doing the welcome for this morning. Mr. Leolin Jackson, over to you. Metzing, please unmute Mr. Jackson.
Hi, good morning, colleagues. My name is Leolin Jackson, as being introduced by Refilwe. After such an introduction, I can't tell lies. The only thing is that all of what had been said relates to the passion that I have for internationalization and the work that we do at CUT. So from my side also, a hearty welcome to this last session of our Family Week. I think for us very important is to have a context of how and why we do these things. CUT is a very young university. And by young, I mean young in comparison to many of the other universities we have in South Africa. And we also focus on the various internationalization activities that focuses on our students, both international and local students, but also our staff, academics, and also professional support services units. but also our external stakeholders for exactly the different types of services that they have to render to ensure that internationalization comes to full fruition. Allow me, please, just to indulge you in terms of why we do family weeks and why it is so important. And then I'll give a brief reflection on what had happened yesterday for the sessions that I attended. I think part of a family week is to allow space where people can actually get together and start discussing certain narratives that we have on our various campuses. And for that note, we invite various dignitaries, but also keynotes and panelists to help us to unpack and unravel what we need to know about Africanization, decolonization, and internationalization. It is also a space where we could share our experiences, our expert advice, good practices, but also allows us to enhance our own capacities in terms of these topics that we are dealing with right now today. I think it's also one of those where when we talk about the complexities of the world, way back in 2011, the Harvard Business Review stated that the world is more complex than it used to be. Now, that was way back in 2011. Tim Morn in 2020 wrote that the modern world has finally become too complex for many of us to understand. And I think part of Tim's understanding of the world and the complexities relates to what we currently also experience in 2022. There are so many things to consider, like geopolitics, macroeconomics, geoeconomics, metaverse, the technology that we have, and many other things. And therefore, it becomes quite important to get people into a space where we can actually interact and talk about it, have interactive dialogue sessions. This, our second family week, which was arranged by our International Academic Partnership Unit with Refilwe and her team, is one of those sessions where we want to create these spaces so that people can start talking about these and what we call complex narratives that we have on our campus. And we do all of this to allow students to have success in their studies, but also our staff members to do what they do best in terms of internationalization, but also contribute to the different challenges that we have globally. I think many of us would understand the SDGs is part and fundamentally part of our strategies nowadays. As the globe moves forward and we have different complexities, we must understand that to understand one complexity is to understand also the context where it comes from. And I think here I would like to speak to what our keynote speaker also reflected on. And I think partly what I liked about what she said was that we must allow multiple knowledge perspectives, the whole notion of a pluriform perspective, using different lenses to acknowledge that it is complex, but together we can actually find those commonalities. She also referred to global tensions in all of this, to what's currently happening within the world, fascism, nationalism, Brexit, extreme Western influences, and many others. And I think all of this needs to be understood when we want to address also issues or narratives like Africanization, decolonization, and internationalization. Also quite important was her emphasis on Ubuntu within the Africa context. It is something that's been with us for many, many years. And it is something that many of us aspire to and live also. And I think that is for me very important, is that we should always understand the context of where we come from, but also where we would like to be and what role higher education is supposed to play in all of this. But then equally important was our panel discussion. I think Prof. Takalani and also Dr. Mashongo made some interesting comments regarding the demystification of Africanization, internationalization, and decolonization. And again, as I said earlier, these are complex matters. Many global players are also entertaining this narrative at a very high level. We talk of First Nation people around the world where voices are being heard. And I think that also fits into what Prof. Jacobs also said in terms of let's listen to the multiple knowledge perspectives of various people so that we can come to a conclusion as to what the trajectory should be of a university, let alone the higher education sector. It is also quite important to understand Jonas Steer's three ideologies about idealism, instrumentality, and educationalism. All of that influences the lens that we use to look at the different narratives of Africanization, decolonization, and also the correlation between all of them with internationalization. I think many of us will understand that as we go into this next phase, it also helps us to understand that if we want to truly do justice to Africanization and also internationalization and decolonization, we have to understand and unpack as much as we can so that everybody is taken on the same journey. Allow me now then to briefly just give you an insight as to what's going to happen today. I am equally happy and excited about how the Family Week has turned out. We have had so far, I think yesterday we had close to 25, if Metsing can correct me, participants online, and we're growing gradually on the second day as well. But I think I would like to invite our colleagues who are currently participants and just delegates to invite the other colleagues that you have on your campus, because the next panel discussion about the role of innovative curriculum development with Africanization, decolonization, and internationalization as catalyst of curriculum transformation is equally important as we have stated earlier. I would like to ask that we congratulate the colleagues who will be on the panel to talk about from where they come from and use their multiple knowledge perspectives to help us to understand the narrative in a much easier way, but also in a way that could benefit not just their universities, but also Central University of Technology. Chair, Madam Program Director, on that note, I would like to say once again, congratulations on what we have achieved thus far. And thank you very much for what we are going to achieve as we go forward. And as I stated earlier, yes, it's a complex world. Since 2011, people were talking about it. And we will never get away from this complexity. But I think together as a collaborative unit, people working together, talking together, and understanding each other, this world will become a little bit less complex. On that note, over to you, Refilwe. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my director. The wealth of knowledge and experience really showed through and in your welcome address. And thank you for the constant support and willingness to allow us to explore different avenues of internationalization and by supporting this initiative and the initiatives that we are having in IAP. Now, colleagues, allow me to introduce our panel for today. We have Dr. Malebu, our Senior Director, Center for Innovative Learning and Teaching. We have Professor Judy Peter, who is the Director of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, and Professor Zibani Mdaweni, who is a senior lecturer and professor at the Department of Political and Administrative Studies at University of Botswana. They have the big task of dialoguing on the role of innovative curriculum development with Africanization, decolonization, and internationalization as catalysts of curriculum transformation. Yesterday, I would be doing a great injustice if I do not bring up this comment, because I think as the panelists are discussing, perhaps they may touch on it, or it may also come through in the discussions for today. Yesterday, a comment on the impact of Christianity and how Christianity was used in colonization and how it impacted our day-to-day lives. Now we're spinning it today and we're saying the role of Christianity or religion and its impact to curriculum development as a catalyst of curriculum transformation. I think it is critical that we also discuss that, as Dr. Mushunga yesterday noted that, and Professor Jacobs. Some of it touch on the aspects of the history of colonization and how we need to start thinking about decolonization. So, has Christianity impacted Africanization? Has it impacted decolonization? Has it impacted internationalization? And how we perceive curriculum development in this new day and age. I hear Dr. Malevo laughing. I am hoping that we're going to discuss this and see it woven through our conversation for today. Colleagues, in between, so that we do not get virtual fatigue, after I'm going to allow the panelists to speak, and then quickly we'll just play a small video just to get your mind out of it, and then we're going to start with the question and answer session. So colleagues, if you allow me, let me formally introduce our panelists for today by reading their short bios. I will read all 3 short bios and then give through to them for them to give us their presentations and discussions. If you would humor me, allow me to introduce Dr. Nzwaki Malebo. Dr. Nzwaki Malebo holds a PhD in microbiology from the University of the Free State. She has a postgraduate diploma in higher education from Rhodes University, a postgraduate diploma in leadership development from University of Stellenbosch. She is currently appointed as the Senior Director for Center for Innovation in Learning and Teaching. She is an NRF rated holder, registered as a professional natural scientist with an SACN ASP with the South African Council for National Scientific Professions. She is currently involved in an academic staff development, a project coordinator for HELTESA ADL CIG, and a coordinator of the iKudu Quail Collaborative Online International Learning Project at CUT. She supervises students at master and doctoral levels in the field of food safety, with research focuses on the use of indigenous knowledge systems for food preservation. She has published work in peer-reviewed journals and presented at local and international conferences. Dear colleagues, please welcome Dr. Nzwaki Malebo as one of our panelists for today. Now you will see her background. She really focuses on indigenous knowledge. So I am very interested to hear how that is going to come across, and with the interesting topic of Africanization, decolonization, internationalization, and the impact of Christianity or religion to our current society. It also gives me great pleasure and allow me to introduce our next panelist, Professor Judy Peter. Professor Judy Peter is an associate professor, art historian, curator, and former director of academic services at the University of Johannesburg. She has published in areas of gender studies, post-colonial studies, and cultural studies in national and international journals, and presented academic papers both nationally and internationally in Brisbane, Massachusetts, Reka, New York. She has participated in various platforms: South African Virtual Arts Historians, College Art Association, Arts Council of Africa, African Studies Association, and the South African Jewelry Council. Wow. Outbound short learning programs for students from the University of Johannesburg have been facilitated by Peter and Zegep, New York and Paris. She has also curated student jewelry exhibitions in South Africa, London, and New York. Peters and her colleagues from Romania conceptualized the collaborative research project titled Between Democracies, 1989 to 2014, remembering Narrating and Reimagining the Past in Eastern and Central Europe and Southern Africa, EESA, for the period 2012 to 2022. Peter has been on the AIEA Leadership Program in 2019, a member of the AIEA Conference Committee 2020 to 2022, EIAE Board 2020, and on the 2019 to 2020 Diversity Abroad, Race and Ethnicity Task Force Chair in numerous panels and presented at APAI, Diversity Conference, AISA, and ASA. Colleagues, please warmly welcome Professor Judy Peter as one of our panelists today. Our last panelist for today is Professor Zibani Maudeni. Professor Udani Maudeni is a political scientist who has done research and published in issues such as state and development, globalization, human rights, cultural groups, election observation, civil society, political violence, and has published several books on Botswana politics. Maudeni has also contributed chapters in books, and his research continues to be activated, and he continues to be activated in research. Colleagues, we have a very rich panel for today. I am honored and I am pleased and I'm excited to hear how our panel disintegrates, disseminates, and reassign and realign our topic today and give us their perspective on how Africanization, decolonization, and internationalization are catalysts to curriculum transformation. Colleagues, please let us hand over to our first panelist, Dr. Ntswaki Malebo. Thank you so much. Medzing, please unmute.
Good morning, colleagues, and thank you so much for that warm welcome, Refilwe. I'm thinking about what you just said now, and I would not like to offend my Christian colleagues on the panel and also joining us virtually. So I think we will leave, the role of Christianity in issues of coloniality for another day, if you allow me. So thank you very much to you and to Ntate Jackson for inviting me. I'm truly excited to share my insights with you. And colleagues will note that I think my first identity is within the field of microbiology. And then I got introduced to higher education studies, and I have been hooked since then. So today I will be focusing on how we can use Africanization, decolonization, and internationalization as catalysts for curriculum transformation. And you will note in my presentation, I will argue that, for many years, especially in the South African context, internationalization or even globalization, those concepts have influenced how we develop our curricula. And I think it's notions of Africanization and decolonization that have been left slightly behind. So as I started, my presentation, excuse me, I think what struck me yesterday is some of the questions that emerged from keynotes, and also I think what our acting Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and Engagement left us with. And I kept asking myself, but what does it mean to be a leading African University of Technology? And as I say, this question is influenced also by listening to what the panelists were saying yesterday. And I've been grappling with myself, does it mean a UOT that should have an African identity, or is it just okay if we are located in Africa? And if it means we have to have an African identity, what does that even mean? And I think these are questions that I'm grappling with, and I will not claim to have answers in my presentation for these particular questions, but let's see how it goes. So colleagues, I wanted to just frame some of the concepts. In framing or in explaining some of the concepts, I think it's where I'm coming from. So if I talk about innovation, I'm coming from these particular definitions, that in terms of, excuse me, in terms of innovation, we look at innovation as an introduction of a new idea, a method or a device, or an improvement to an existing method. And then when it comes to curriculum, Knight describes it as more than just content, but a set of purposeful, intended experiences. And I want us to focus on the word experiences. It talks to content, to how it's organized, to the teaching and learning space. And I think that's where the notion of experience comes from, and also how the students would then experience assessment. So that's curriculum. So when we talk about curriculum, I think that's where I'll be coming from. And I like what my former colleague used to say curriculum is complex. Curriculum is, she would say it's messy. But also I think curriculum also represents a set of ideas or ideologies that are presented by, a certain context. So that's where I'll be coming from. And when I look at internationalization, I like the definition that Singh suggests when we think about curriculum internationalization, that it should align with realities of our context while being relevant globally. So we need to think about implementing the different pedagogical approaches when we think about internationalization. And then we come to the two concepts of decolonization. And I like this definition that I found this one online, that it's about cultural, psychological, and economic freedom. I thought that was powerful for Indigenous people, with the goal of achieving Indigenous sovereignty. It's the ability, the right and ability of Indigenous people to practice self-determination over their land, cultures, political, and economic systems. And you will see when we start touching a bit on coloniality, how the cultures and the identity of some of the Indigenous people has been affected. And then for me, I think Africanization is a humanizing approach that recognizes the being, the self, as part of a community that works towards a collective goal. And I think it's a collective goal that Dr. Jackson referred to this morning within a specific context. It is reclaiming what was lost through colonization. So I think we heard yesterday, the different, that there is a death of language, a death of knowledge, and also identity. So that's how I view. I think this one is my kind of coining of what Africanization is. So as I've argued, I think as South Africa, we have been involved and we have used internationalization as a lever, to transform our curricula. And I start with the White Paper 3, which is a policy that we have adopted when we develop curricula within the higher education sector in South Africa. So in the White Paper 3, I think the purpose there is South Africa's transition from apartheid and minority rule to a democracy that requires all existing practices, institutions, and where all existing practices, institutions, and values are viewed anew and rethought in terms of fitness for the new era. And it's also a recognition that higher education plays a central role in the social, cultural, and economic development of modern society. In South Africa, the challenge when the white paper was drafted, and still that challenge exists, is to redress past inequalities, is to transform the higher education system to serve a new social order, to meet pressing national needs, and to respond to new realities and opportunities. So this is where we are coming from post 1994, when we started with the process of, what informs curricula and what do we use as a catalyst for curriculum development. Following the white paper, I think we had the HEQF, the HEQSF that are aligned to the National Qualification Framework. And I think there as well, I think that's what we use. That's the lens that we've been using to say, as you develop curricula, you need to enable articulation of programs and the transfer of students between programs and higher education institutions. So historically, our universities were not created equally. And after the merger, we had different identities as universities. We had our comprehensive universities, our traditional, our UOTs. And the intention of these policies was to say, as you develop curricula, remember that you need to allow for movement between these existing institutions within the higher education sector. So, but infused and embedded in the work that was done then has always been about how do we serve the global needs, how do we remain responsive to the global needs. And I think in our way to go there, we tend to have forgotten about local relevance. And I'll touch on that in a bit. So these are some of the policies that we've been using. And as I argue, internationalization is then embedded within these. If we look at the South African, higher education sector, and if we look at the context and how curricula is developed, we view knowledge, as when you have knowledge, then you have the ability to be more innovative. You have the ability to add value to existing products. And this is the argument of McKenna. And for us as a UOT, using the policies that I have already shared with you, we are expected to contribute to knowledge creation by equipping students with graduate attributes and specific niche-orientated qualifications that will secure graduates jobs and a viable career path. And it's when we talk about the graduate attributes that we note that for us as CUT, we have aligned ourselves with the specific skills that are needed for a global market, for a global perspective. So it still emphasizes that in our thinking and in the way we still develop curricula, we still have internationalization at the back of our mind. And so as we create these curricula, we expect that this knowledge will bring about change, but not only for our students' lives, but it will be responsive to societal and the country's economic needs. So I will get back to that in a little bit. And I think for us as UOTs, what we've tried to do when we develop curricula is we do bring representatives from industry through our advisory committees in a way of including other voices. But as much as we include industry, I think then we are influenced in a way to create a curricula that speaks for a certain context. And I think taking back to what I spoke about responsiveness to societal needs, I think that's where we sometimes miss the point a little bit and we don't get to the societal needs. So we have then as a university in responding to all of these calls, in responding to how globally the world is becoming more complex, the complexity that Dr. Jackson was referring to. I think other scholars like Barnett refer to that as a world of super complexity. And recently, I think we have coined it as a VUCA world, where we have a lot of ambiguity and a lot of unpredictability. So as a university, we tried to be responsive to all of those. And I think we've had also internal processes such as the STEPS process. And the aim here was to ensure that our curriculum internally responds to the pressing needs in the job market, the economy, and developmental needs. And when we talk about developmental needs, our focus is not only on South Africa, but it was also on the African continent, but also globally as well. So my emphasis there is that we've always been looking at ways to internationalize our curriculum, because we wanted our graduates to be employable everywhere and not just in South Africa. So you can see that a focus of the South African legislative framework and institutions, it has been, there has been a lot of emphasis of, responding to global needs, but also the emphasis has been to physical access, to say how many students do we bring in. But I think in developing curricula, and now I think I want to move towards decolonization and Africanization. So in developing curricula, we've always forgotten what is also in the white paper, where we talk about the social justice mandate, where we really, as institutions, need to place an emphasis on how curricula and pedagogy can be used as levers for students to access disciplinary knowledge and knowledge practices. I think sometimes our students feel alienated because they don't understand the disciplinary discourse. And this is because most of our curriculum in South Africa, it draws mainly from the global north. And I know there are people now who are intentionally ensuring that within their practices, they draw from the global south as well. But in the sciences and spaces where I've been historically, we draw mainly from the global north. And some of our assessment and teaching practices are not aligned with the diverse needs of those that we are bringing into university through the physical access. So there is physical access, but in terms of knowledge or epistemology, there's still no access for our students. So this indicates that what gets taught and how and how it is taught continues to remain unchanged, and it calls for different ways then of looking at curricula. So with all these beautiful policies that we've had that were supposed to change our society, we are still the world's most unequal country. I am mindful of time, and I don't want to take too much from the other speakers. There's a lot that I can say about this picture, but I will reserve it for comments that may emerge from the room. So I now ask myself, what now? I mean, we've been using this, and I question that, is it not time to then include other forms of knowledge as we develop curricula, the voices that are marginalized, especially when curricula still draws mainly from the global north. And Lange argues that the focus on skills for employability, economic growth, and the failure to address social and cultural legacies of apartheid is due to a neoliberal framing of our higher education policies. So these policies I have shared, as much as we try to push the transformation agenda, by their nature, they are neoliberal and therefore push us in that particular direction. So, there are calls now to say, but can't we use other lenses to look at the process of developing curricula? And I start with the term decoloniality. And Ndlovu Gajeni argues that it is the liberation of colonized peoples from global coloniality, but it's also a way of thinking, of knowing, of doing. So there is a call to say we need to change ways in which we think and do things at the moment. And so this is where we have to revisit in developing curricula. And coloniality, according to Kujano, cited in Gacheni's paper, has different levers, economic control, control of authority and knowledge and subjectivity. So, it also talks about gender and sexuality. So we are still using policies that are still tying us down, that are not allowing us to allow other forms of knowledge to come through. And because of this, we are in a space, and we find ourselves in a space where Ngugi wa Thiong'o argues that it has resulted in an eradication of people's beliefs in our names, in our languages, in our capacities, in ourselves. And within this context, we view our past as one of non-achievement, and we distance ourselves from that particular past. We don't want to know, I always think about, I make a basic example and say, everyone will tell you that Shaka had a spear, but no one will tell you about the history of how the spear came to being, that the metal that was used for the spear had to be mined. But we are so embedded and infused in wanting to be more of, our identity now is more of a Western and a Northern kind of identity than acknowledging who we are. And I think that's where we miss the point if we don't decolonize, and that's where we keep losing our languages and our identity. And so decoloniality then is born out of a realization that the modern world is an asymmetrical world order that is sustained not only by colonial matrices of power, but also pedagogies and epistemologies of equilibrium that continue to produce alienated Africans that are socialized into hating Africa that produced them, and hating and liking Europe and America that reject them. And this I have seen with some of my friends who will say, but you guys don't know about service. They're very impatient because they now live in America. So we have produced kind of that where that system where we lose our identity. And I argue that we need to start thinking about decolonizing then in order to bring the voices that are marginalized, but to also, reclaim our identity as Africans. We observe a system where indigenous knowledge is relegated to what is coined the barbarian margins of society. It's unscientific, it's backward. But someone will come to the village and take a plant and extract the active compound and patent it and make a lot of money. But this is the same knowledge that is classified as backward and unscientific. And I think we need to do more in this space. Decolonization then enables us to challenge the asymmetrical world order and to open spaces for other ways of knowing and being. And this is important. So these are some of the books that I thought I would share with you, the work that is being done around curriculum and responding to the call to decolonize. So I won't go into a lot of detail. As I said, I'm also mindful of time. This is another book, Decolonizing Knowledge and Knowers. And I like this one because it uses a theory that is a Northern-based kind of theory, a legitimation code theory by Mayton. And they use this to move from just debating. And I think that's what we tend to do when we get to Africanization and decolonization. We want to focus on what it means and unpacking the terminologies, but not really doing the work. So I encouraged colleagues that are part of this meeting to look at these books. As I'm about to conclude, program director, I think for me then, you cannot separate decolonization and Africanization. And to Africanize or to decolonize does not mean to remove other ways of knowing and of being. And I think the philosophy of Ubuntu promotes the working together of a collective good and not of individuals. It welcomes different ways of knowing and of being. And I think that's why we need to start using Africanization as a lens when we develop our curricula. In doing so, we will also address the loss of identity, language, and knowledge. And this is linked to the arguments that are made by decolonial scholars. And I argue that we can no longer be inward looking for individual good, and that African philosophies such as Ubuntu, they create spaces for us to work collaboratively for the greater good. This is what we need to solve the complex problems that we have referred to. And I think that's, we have been using some of the philosophies of, African philosophies in our research, and we'll call it multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary. But at the end of the day, if you look at what happens, and even in communities of practice, it is about promoting collective individuals for, working for the collective. So when I argue about Africanization, I speak about the knowledge holders. And this is a picture shared by one of my colleagues. So when we talk about Africanizing the curriculum, it doesn't mean we go to a community, we get the knowledge, we document, and then we publish. It means we involve those who hold the knowledge, and they become part, just like we've involved industries when we were developing a curricula that is responsive for the for the workspace. So if we want to be responsive to the needs of those within our communities on the ground, and we want to bring African knowledge within spaces in higher education, then we need to involve those who hold knowledge. And this is one of the examples of those holding knowledge, teaching our students in terms of agro-processing and how it works for them within an African context using principles of IKS. And these are some of the products that emerged after that particular workshop. Program director, I think I would like to pause there. Ke a leboha for the time and opportunity granted to me to make this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Malebu. You really hit the nail on the mark there when you are showing practicalities of how we can Africanize and how Africanization and decolonization are truly catalysts of how the curriculum is developed and also instructed. Thank you so much. I'm excited now to hear how Professor Judy Peter complements what you have just said. And from her perspective, she brings in a different perspective, but also which is well balanced from a historian perspective, from cultural research and gender studies or gender equality research that she's been involved in. Professor Judy Peter, I hand over to you to give us your perspective and your antidotes. Thank you. Professor Peter, are you online? Thank you.
Yes, I am. I'm just getting my PowerPoint sorted out. Okay. Good morning, and thank you so much to the Central University of Technology for this opportunity. And it's quite a difficult one, because the constructs that you ask us to interrogate is complicated. And yes, and I will provide a diverse perspective, and let's see how this dialogue unfolds. So I'm going to provide a perspective on the topic, and I subtitle it a critical review. Okay, so the notions and construct of the decolonization and Africanization of higher education underpin the 2019 National Policy for the Internationalization of Higher Education. But the interpretation thereof has global and local trade-offs and perspectives. I will argue broadly. The trade-off is the heterogeneous political histories, and the spin-off is the hyper-connected world and the myriad of opportunities that accompany the new technological world order. Theoretical and political readings of the former colonies and empires gained momentum in the 1970s and 80s. These geographical and political hubs of history cover spaces and places from down under to the Caribbean, Africa, and across the globe. The revolt by nation states and against the tyrannies of socialism, apartheid, from imperial agendas, for example, the Anglophone, Francophone, and Lusophone colonies. The diasporic movement of people across continents, whether the result of forced or economic trade decisions, complicated the contemporary trajectories of internationalization of higher education in a decolonial landscape. The complexities of multiple cultures and histories mean higher education and the internationalization of higher education need to navigate diverse and moving components. Furthermore, First People or Indigenous people, settler, colonial, or immigrant histories constitute the demographies of higher education. As practitioners of higher education and internationalization, we navigate these complex and fluid spaces of cross-border and transnational, transatlantic cultural mingling. The palimpsest of political, cultural, economic considerations as additional layers of being politically correct in the Me Too, Fees Must Fall, and woke culture in its integration of race and identity politics. I know this is a mouthful of terms, but this is what we need to interrogate. Where do we start to navigate the internationalization of higher education? What is the focus? Global North, Global South, South-South? What are the binary relations of East and West, North and South? How do we prepare students in this hyper-connected world of technologies, travel, global pandemics, climatic-related disasters, and sustainable development goals? This paper reflects on the lived experiences of my role as an academic, a senior international officer, and which is a SIO, and this is to borrow from the Global North classification for leaders in higher education, to position and propose a decolonial approach to consider decolonization, internationalization, and Africanization of the curriculum. I also frame 4 IR paradigm shifts since 2020 as a disruptor and a catalyst for radical changes in pedagogies and learning and teaching methodologies. As we stand at the precipice of rethinking strategies, methodologies to enhance internationalization of higher education in South Africa, the continent, and across our borders, we return to the drawing board to purposefully redesign a strategy for the internationalization of higher education in COVID or COVID endemic worlds. The acceleration to online and collaborative learning and teaching and digital methodologies require new strategies such as blended learning and multimodal learning to be relevant and agile in times of great fertility, uncertainty, complexities, and as already pointed out in the VUCA world. Virtual and physical migration to smart learning spaces are the norm, and the impact on the academic project and in turn the internationalization agenda responds to transformations and transitions in higher education. I then focus on some of the theoretical underpinnings, and I look at notions of post-coloniality, decoloniality, and African futurism. In formulating a response, I'm cognizant of the evolving discourse of post-coloniality as developed by theorists such as Homi Bhabha, Spivak, Jacques Derrida, to the decolonial agenda. The critique of Euro-North theorists is fundamental in the 2015 Fees Must Fall movement and the Rhodes Must Fall hashtag movements. Marked the emergence of a decolonial project as promulgated by Steve Biko, Zileza, and Kwame Nkrumah. And, just for your information, at this point, I'm supervising some PhD students while providing new thinking around African futurism. And one of them is Boitumelo Kembo. The political agenda of the decolonial project is to develop a strategy for internationalization and the decolonization of the curriculum in Africa, to critically redefine and develop global and decolonial strategies for cultural diversity and curricula, also for mobility and destination countries. So in essence, I'm talking about the decolonization and Africanization of the operational functions around the curriculum development as well. The need for universities to consider regionalization as part of internationalization. This is motivated by the fact that funding agencies and development partners and the African Union and the 5 sub-regional communities are supportive and committed to regional collaboration. This further inspires a Pan-African spirit motivated by development based on self-reliance, determination of African people, and a democratic and people-centered governance. The related constructs of Afro-optimism, Afro-futurism, African futurism is embedded in science fiction and iconographies as aligned with erased African histories, as a metaphor to reimagine Africa in a positive light. The Black consciousness movement and African futurism prioritize self-determination, Black pride, dignity, positive development, and self-representation. African futurism is a relatively new term devised by the Nigerian-American sci-fi writer Okorafor in 2019. While the already mentioned notions are new readings, I will argue the beginnings may be found in the constructs of Pan-Africanism, the African Renaissance, as pointed out by Kembo. The Black consciousness movement was premised on the work of Steve Biko. Once more, due to time, I've presented some touch points for further deliberation and interrogation. Other views that challenge temporalities such as geography, the national demography, the politics, and the ideas of post-colonies, neo-colonies, trans-global identities, transcultural identities, cross-border and cross-continental issues. I've provided a contextualization of global, local, and theoretical framings we need to consider when we look at curriculum development. I also want to address the internationalization of higher education within the temporalities of the decoloniality project. And as you see, I've just looked at some of the examples and definitions of the internationalization of higher education. And Woodsick's definition is up on the screen, which looks at comprehensive internationalization. And I think in the South African context and in the internationalization of higher education across the 27 universities, there's been a unanimous adoption of this notion of internationalization of higher education. And it can also be considered as a strategic and coordinated process that seeks to align and integrate policies, programs, and initiatives to position colleges and universities as more global oriented and internationally connected institutions. And I think most institutions also, use Jane Knight as one of the seminal authors in the internationalization of higher education. And her definition is once more provided on the screen, where she describes internationalization as a process of integrating an international, intercultural, and global dimension into goals, teaching, learning, research, and service functions of a university or higher education system. So I have been participating in internationalization conferences since 2016, and as I've been mentioned, this definition has been globally accepted. The prevailing consensus on the definition of the comprehensive internationalization as a strategic response to higher education is also all-encompassing. And this is, the way I would interpret this definition. in terms of its institutional strategy, policy, PQM or program qualification mix, and the internationalization ecosystem. The quota definition in national and institutional documents, like I said, even in the national framework for higher education also uses Jane Knight's definition. So at this juncture, we are reminded of some of the fundamental functions of higher education. And before I go there, I've provided some of the global trends, and this was a slide that was presented in March of 2020 this year, right? I mean, 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. And if you look at the date for the slides, it's 2017. So in addition to colonizing the curriculum and looking at Africanization and notions of even African futurism, these are some of the skills that needs to also be embedded into the curriculum or the thinking around curriculum. And I highlight them, but I'll refer to them as I go on as well. So we cannot ignore, at the same time, we cannot ignore the impact of globalization. Here I consider this reality in the context of the interdependency of global economies and the intercultural engagement in the contemporary global reality of the widening divide in our material conditions, the health crisis, the geopolitics, identity politics, and the mandate of those SDGs. Broadly provides a framework for the internationalization of higher education, filtering down to transforming the curriculum. The goals of the policy framework is to interrogate, the diverse aspects of internationalization that include intercultural and global dimensions to enhance the quality of higher education. Internationalization at home extends beyond the mobility of staff and students and is more concerned with the domestic outcomes related to internationalization as the intercultural curriculum that benefits all students. The rationale for the internationalization of higher education of South Africa is premised on the idea that South African HDIs have attractive research opportunities and requests for cross-border HDIs collaborations. The overarching rationale for internationalization of higher education is to position higher education systems to be competitive in a globalized world, to advance the quality of higher education, to enhance the intellectual diversity nationally and regionally in teaching and learning, research, and community engagement, to benefit society and enhance opportunities for higher education to contribute to the public good, to contribute towards the development of scholars and learners capable of addressing global challenges and at the same time to be locally relevant. And these are, some of the attributes and the skills, like sense-making, social intelligence, novel and adaptive thinking, cross-cultural competencies, computational thinking, new media literacy, interdisciplinarity, design mindset, cognitive load management, and virtual collaboration. So I think as we all are aware that, 2020 accelerated us into this virtual world. And some of the key challenges that we also need to be mindful in developing a curriculum, while being politically correct, we've also have to take cognizance of contributing to increasingly digital and economic society, leveraging technology for better and more exclusive education, corresponding to growth and the shifting demands of society. The quality and relevance needs to be assured, as well as remaining global in the age of nationalism and becoming flexible and innovative organizations. And here we also got to be mindful of the theory of change, of intercultural learning, the global citizenship, the internationalization of education, And like I've said, to be globally able and locally committed citizens. So internationalization, decolonization, and Africanization of higher education. It takes various forms, and the way we can operationalize the internationalization of the curriculum to integrate the intercultural and global dimensions of internationalization into its curriculum, learning outcomes, assessment tasks, teaching methods, and support services for global study programs. So, I've listed all these different aspects of internationalization. And as I've indicated, each of these needs to be decolonized. We need to interrogate what institutions we partner with. What is inbound and outbound objectives of internationalization? The curriculum, how do the theories that we've spoken about in terms of decoloniality, Africanization, how do these inform the curriculum? And also the decolonizing of winter schools and short learning programs, global classrooms. How do we decolonize this process in terms of destination countries, which impacts the curriculum? The ideological, and as I've just alluded to global partnerships, the ideological constructs of the global North and global South are essential considerations in the value chain of partnerships, in the partnership identification, establishment, activation, and entrenchment, in alignment with decolonial perspectives of the geopolitics of space and displacement, the diasporas and the binaries such as North, South, West, East, Eurocentric, Afrocentric, and the former colonies needs to be revisited. There are overarching commonalities in the mandate of the BRICS interventions, strategic plans for global partnerships. The need to bolster lateral or symmetrical and longitudinal and other asymmetrical partnerships along ideological lines, former colonies within the SADC region and Africa's and Asia Pacific underlines partnership development. The building of community of practice, I think, is quite an important catalyst in terms of transforming the curriculum as well as the internationalization agenda. Leading the international agenda is not a siloed exercise, but includes a host of internal, external, local, regional, national, and global relations. This includes setting up international research forums, alliances, regionally, locally, provincially, and with national government structures, and the participation in focused international bodies such as the AIEA, EAIE, ACU, SANOD, API, which most institutions are already part of. And I'm going to cite one such example, and that is CHEC, which is a consortium of the Western Cape universities, Stellenbosch, UCT, CPUT, and UWC. And I've been part of this consortium. And so one of the activities that was taken is, I provide a summary here of the activities, which is part of the CHEC board, which actually funding was awarded by the Mellon Foundation in 2015. To look at the decolonial agenda. And what has happened here is that over the past 2 years, I've been working in collaboration with colleagues from the other 3 universities, where we've done desktop research on the decolonial agenda. So, as I said, these are some of the activities that was rolled out and some of the mandates. So what some of the findings was that language and terminology used to underpin or explain decoloniality is complex. While the terms are used often are synonymous, for example, decoloniality and transformation may be used in a synonymous and conflated way, the constructs have particular definitions and associations. more discussions are definitely needed here. So in the survey across the universities, there still isn't a consolidated approach to dealing with the decolonization of the curriculum. So these are some of the questions that have arrived out of this project. Is decoloniality a subsection, a dimension of transformation? Can graduate attributes be aligned to humanists? In addition, can the issue of gender, including more women or doctoral studies programs, be addressed under the umbrella of decolonization? Or do we require a radical reconceptualization of decoloniality? And if so, what could this be? The discussions and questions raised indicated that this is not only philosophers who would welcome support in the clarification of the terms and discourse. Lecturers as well, in a range of areas and disciplines, indicated that they would value support for how they could consider changes in their own curriculum. One asked, how can I translate the principle of Ubuntu in my work as a lecturer? And what terminology should I be using? Sorry. It was once more recognized that language is a form of knowledge. And the demystification of terminology is also important, not only for philosophers, but also for practitioners, from executives to administrators to lecturers. The discussion above implied that it would be important to involve students, as mentioned by the previous speaker as well. Not only staff members on the more philosophical and practical levels, but also give them the opportunity to speak to their own experiences and expectations of spaces they occupy at universities, and ways in which students might be involved will be considered in the next project going forward. It was agreed that the project of decolonization is a continuous one, and that the three remaining projects that will still follow will deal with this. The underlying points is another question that was raised in the seminar. How do we escape the trap of the colonial university and the way of thinking it promotes and imbues in its staff and students? The question highlights the issues of consciousness, liberation, central to the concept of decoloniality in its staff and students. And this question highlights the issues of consciousness and liberation central to the question of decoloniality. I hope this paper will also, like I said earlier, create some touch points for our dialogue that would follow. Thank you very much. And these are the three official languages of the Western Cape. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Peter. Wow, you and Dr. Malebu are making us really think and self-introspect. For now, colleagues, remember when we started, I said I do not want to create virtual meeting fatigue in you. We're going to take a 5-minute break, and you will get to see, hear more and see more about CUT and some of the facilities it has. And then we will cross over to Professor Zibani Maudiani. And that would be exactly at 11:20. So if need be, colleagues can quickly grab a cup of coffee, a glass of water, go on a quick stretch, and then let us convene again at 11:20. Thank you so much, colleagues.
CUT is the foremost higher education institution in the heartland of South Africa. Boasting campuses in Bloemfontein and Welkom in the Free State, CUT is dedicated to quality education and training in science, engineering and technology. Formerly known as Technikon Free State, the establishment first opened its doors in 1981 with 285 students enrolled in mainly secretarial, art and design programs. In 2004, with the restructuring of the higher education landscape, CUT embraced its new status as a University of Technology. Now, with student headcount of over 19,000 in 4 faculties, namely Engineering and Information Technology, Humanities, Management Sciences, and Health and Environmental Sciences, the university continues to make a positive contribution to the social and technological innovation outcomes in the Central region. CUT's diverse student community is also a true reflection of the region's demographic. The CUT is the only university in Central South Africa to offer programs such as engineering, radiography, clinical and biomedical technology, hospitality, and tourism management. Since 1990, nearly 53,000 students have been kept at this leading facility. During 2014 and 2015, the Department of Electrical, Electronic and Computer Engineering introduced the Higher Certificate in Renewable Energy Technologies and a National Diploma in Sustainable Energy. CUT's research and innovation leadership in many areas, especially 3D printing, is world-class. The Center for Rapid Prototyping and Manufacturing is a world-class facility. In 2016, CUT was the first institution in Africa and amongst only a few in the world to receive the International Organization for Standardization Certification for Design and Manufacture of Medical Devices. 38 years of academic excellence ensures students are in good hands when studying at CUT. The Idea Generator Center offers a development hub where students, staff, and even the public can develop their innovative ideas and projects. The Central University of Technology Free State's history, from its humble beginnings to the proud institution it is today, is reflected in its buildings. CUT has invested about 600 million rand in various key facilities for students and staff through funding from the Department of Higher Education and Training and Council as their contributions towards this investment. Both our campuses house a full array of modern, state-of-the-art library information services, well-equipped laboratories and lecturing venues, student cafeterias, extended computer hours, 24-hour security, vibrant student centers with a variety of student activities and services. The first phase of the university's infrastructure project brought about 6 beautiful and state-of-the-art buildings, 2 of which are on the Welkom campus. On the Bloemfontein campus, the Yarona building houses the Science, Technology, Engineering and Mathematics or STEM Academy and the Faculty of Engineering and Information Technology. The Ellen Kuzwayo building is a 3-story high building housing lecturing halls, labs and offices of the Faculty of Health and Environmental Sciences. The Tatai Song and Kopanong buildings are home to the Faculty of Humanities. These buildings enabled the expansion of the teacher education programs to increase teacher training programs in science, engineering, technology, and mathematics. The Tutong building on the Welkom campus consists of computer science labs with lecturing rooms, study labs, and micro-lesson classrooms. The Mangaliso Robert Sobukwe building houses communications and information technology. It has computer labs, lecture rooms and offices with a recording studio. Student residences Unity, Ikayaletu, Maya Angelou, Protea East and West, as well as Maipatu Mokatsane were built to the tune of 73.4 million rand. At the Bloemfontein campus, student residences worth 43.7 million were also constructed. Other new and renovated buildings include the Dirkutse extension, which now boasts upgraded labs, including new radiology labs, as well as a new beauty salon for somatology. In Bloemfontein, the Eendrag and Mannheim residences received a makeover, and students can now also enjoy upgraded vending gazebos, cafeteria, and food zone, 24-hour study areas in the library, as well as new PC labs. The hotel school's entrance area, bar area, and restaurant have also received an upgrade, along with the bathrooms at the Boetroski Hall. Furthermore, the CUT's Bloemfontein campus also boasts new teacher education and engineering buildings, with further refurbishment of the e-learning, humanitas, art, engineering technology, and teacher education buildings.
Welcome back, colleagues. Do you all have your cups of tea or coffee? And have we all done our quick human stretches? I'm going to now hand over to Professor Zibani Mudaweni to give his perspective. And then after he presents, we will then go into the discussion and inclusive of, it's a fully inclusive discussion and question and answer session. We would like to also ask the audience to engage and interject so that we have a fruitful conversation. Professor Mundau, over to you. Medzing, you can unmute Professor Mundau and connect him. Prof?
We are trying to share our screen.
Ah, thank you.
Can you see anything?
We see two screens, Prof. Ah, we see a PowerPoint.
Is it visible?
It's a split screen, Prof. Is there a way that Medzing can share the PowerPoint from his side?
What did you say?
Can you send the presentation to Medzing and then he shares it on his side and then you then speak over the presentation and cue him to
Also,
the
I'm
slides?
sharing his screen, so I can't share two screens simultaneously.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah.
The audience, can you see the screen? Or but we'll also listen to Professor Mundau and the presentations will be made available after the webinar. Are colleagues comfortable? Can I get thumbs up or thumbs down? Colleagues? Okay. All right. Professor Mundeni, you can continue.
But the other people can't see.
Prof, I think that the alternative that we are coming with is you can speak to the presentations and present because you are very audible. And then after the webinars, we're going to share all the presentations with the colleagues. Okay, Prof. So you can continue speaking.
You can see it now.
Yes, we even see that you're trying to share it. So please start, you can start presenting, Prof.
Oh, if it is not visible, I can just go ahead and present.
Yes, Prof. That is what I was suggesting. And we will share the presentations with everyone.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Prof. Over to you.
Yes, my name is Professor Zibani Mundeni. I teach political science at the University of Botswana. I was invited to participate in this debate, and as a political scientist, I'll be coming from the perspective of political science. And maybe to start with, to note that the concept of Africanization is not a new concept. It may be new in education, but in political science, it's a very, very old concept. It comes with the origins of Pan-Africanism. Africans in the diaspora and Africans in the continent trying to link together and find a working formula to achieve independence and self-rule. So that at the beginning, before we got our independence as African states, Pan-Africanism was already there, and the concept of Africanization was in existence. And at the center of this concept was African unity. And the initial proposal was for a continental government, or a centralized government of some kind, or a federal government headquartered somewhere in Africa. And we are familiar with the fact that that idea did not pass. Instead of a central government, we had an intergovernmental organization, the OAU, which came into existence in the 1960s. And maybe to highlight that the concept of a centralized African government comes with the concept of bigness. There are writers on Africa who think, bigness does not work for Africa, particularly looking at the big African states, South Africa, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Angola, DRC. Their argument is that while bigness has promoted development elsewhere, in Africa, bigness seems to promote state failure. And as a result, some people discourage or were unwilling to go for a single centralized African state, because it brings dangers with it. That if that one state becomes dysfunctional, if that one state becomes a failed state, it means the whole of Africa will fail. And as a result, hello? You can hear me?
Continue, we can hear you. Yes, Prof.
Should I continue?
Yes, Prof, you can continue.
Yes,
We can hear
Prof,
you.
please continue.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yes. The idea was, if you constitute one central government to govern the rest of Africa, if that state becomes dysfunctional, if it becomes a failed state, then it means the whole of Africa is condemned into poverty and into unwanted wars. Yeah. So, okay, the idea of a centralized government failed, and we ended up with an intergovernmental organization, the OAU. And this one, the representation was coming from the governments of Africa, the independent governments of Africa. And of course, we are aware that at the center of their politics was the liberation of South Africa and the rest of Africa. So basically, our research shows that African states were or became independent at a very difficult time, a time of the Cold War, in which the West and the East were using Africa as pawns We have experienced a lot of wars in Africa in which superpowers were involved, heavily involved, sponsoring the warring factions, and as a result, leading to several civil wars in Africa. So, having established a continental intergovernmental body, some other Pan-Africanists like Julius Nyerere, they insisted, even an intergovernmental organization was not enough. It was too big and too far away from the interests of the African people. They insisted on regional organization, regional intergovernmental organizations. We're talking of ECOWAS here, we're talking of SADC here, and the rest. The idea here being regionalism promotes cultural diversity, it promotes regional uniqueness, and it recognizes diverse historical experiences. In other words, it assumed that the experiences of Southern Africa were different from the experiences of East Africa, West Africa, North Africa, and so on. So that the histories of the different regions must be central in designing the political institutions that were to run independent Africa. So you see in political science, the kind of Africanization is different from what we are talking about now. And actually, one may even say, while in political science, Africanization came much early, in education, Africanization appears like it's a new concept. But like I said, this is borrowed from Pan-Africanism, which guided development in early Africa. And of course, once you build regional organizations like SADC and ECOWAS and so on, now you talk of politics of regionalism. Books and a lot of research has been done on regionalism. We have even organized regional standby forces to intervene in neighboring countries where there is trouble that threatens the whole region, like we see happening in Mozambique currently. And when you talk about regional standby force, you are involving yourself in fighting regional terrorism. That also links you with international terrorism, so that you recognize terrorism is not only a problem in West Africa or in Southern Africa, but it's an international problem. So you can see the concerns in political science are different. The kind of Africanization that we deal with is a bit different also. And in addition to intergovernmental regional organizations like SADC, we have civil society regional organizations. We have Media Institute of Southern Africa, we have Electoral Commissions Forum, which bring all electoral commissions together. We have SADC Parliamentary Forum, and so on. So that we don't only study regional organization at state level, we also do so at civil society level. We have designed courses that incorporate regional concerns at both intergovernmental level and civil society level. And then we also recognize that many years after independence in Africa, we reached a point where we were experiencing failed states in Africa, highly indebted countries needing international loans and getting subjected to structural adjustment programs. And we realized that what seems to have happened is not because we did not Africanize enough or we did not decolonize enough. What seems to be the case is that we did not organize developmental states. By this, we mean states that are focused on producing wealth for their countries and that are trying to enrich their citizens. Our focus was elsewhere. Our focus was on liberating Africa, and that diverted our attention. And you cannot achieve a goal that you are not pursuing. If you are pursuing African liberation, you will achieve African liberation. If you are pursuing the goal of making your state rich, chances are you will achieve that goal. If you are pursuing the goal of fighting inequalities, chances are you will achieve the goal of reducing inequalities. So that the state focus here becomes central, depending on what the state is focusing on. If African states make liberating Africa their central focus, it means they must forgo development. I remember during the early years, presidents like Nyerere, president like Seretse Khama, they were the ministers of foreign affairs of their countries to allow them to link with regional organizations and continental organizations, where the central focus was on the liberation of Africa. And that meant, you see, state structuring is important. If a state is dominated by its military, then the chances are it will pursue militarism. If a state is dominated by its development ministries, chances are it will become a developmental state. If a state is dominated by welfare institutions that are targeting inequalities, chances are it will become a welfare state. So that what we find missing in Africa are what we call developmental states that focus on creating new wealth for the country, not on redistributing or fighting inequalities. We don't have in Africa states that focused on new wealth. I'll give you an example. Nyerere, when he was president of Tanzania, he was presented by economists the proposal that Tanzania must build industries. And Nyerere was saying, we don't have money to build industries. And he even said urban areas were exploiting the rural areas. So he saw urban people as marginal. He saw industries as marginal, factories as marginal, and his focus was on the African peasants. He wanted to develop the African peasants, and his formula was what we call villagization. For some reason, many African communities, they live a scattered life, where one homestead is that side, another one is that side. Villagization meant bringing people together to live in an organized village fashion or urban setting. And as a result, people's homes were destroyed. People were forcefully moved to the new villages. This is the Africanization that we experienced in political science, creating havoc among communities, so that the cultures that Africans had were not only destroyed by colonialism, but by our own state institutions. When you bring people into big villages, it means you must relocate them from their original places. And when you relocate people from their original places, chances are their culture also disappear. So that when we talk of African culture, reviving African culture, we must not only make the mistake of assuming that colonialism is the only one that destroyed African culture. Even African states destroyed African cultures. Yes, we continue. And of course, the end of the Cold War around the 1980s led to the Africanization of civil wars in Africa. This was a time when superpowers were pulling out of Africa and focusing in Eastern Europe. That was becoming independent with the coming into being of new states after the collapse of the Soviet Union. Big powers pulled out of Africa. As a result, people thought, without Western support, without the West and the East providing weapons to warring factions in Africa, they would run out of ammunition and the civil wars would end in Angola, in Mozambique, and so on. But we didn't see that happen. Instead, the wars of Africa were Africanized. What this meant was, instead of depending on foreign donations of weapons and so on, Africans used resources, natural resources in their own countries, like diamonds, like oil, to finance their civil wars. We saw this happening in Angola and many other countries, so that our Africanization of African wars became associated with resource wars. Instead of using diamonds or oil for development, they were used for fighting civil wars. And the civil wars continued, and we are familiar with child soldiers, with population displacements in Africa, and so on. So that the concept of Africanization, when we bring in political science, calls for broadening it, so that we don't only focus on the educational side, but also on the political side of how to organize states properly, so that they can start focusing on development. Now, we are also familiar with the liberation of South Africa and its independence in 1994. A new concept emerged: African Renaissance. I remember there was a big conference in South Africa. I think it was 1999, that brought African scholars from all over, including those in the diaspora, to come and develop a new concept of African Renaissance. This is largely where the concept of Africanizing education came from. People started believing that Africa was not developing because people's minds were decolonized. Technology was foreign to them, and so on. They were calling for cultural revival, and with the coming in of globalization, cultural revival became a reality, as globalization provided resources for even extinct cultures to revive. Now, we also want to show that we need a new research orientation. Of course, you have started this orientation that moves towards Africanization, but we also need to understand the Africans better. Not by generalizing African experience, but by going deep into studying each African culture and see whether reviving such a culture
Prof, we have lost you. Professor Mundawa.
in pre-colonial times, Basotho had a federal state system headed by a king who married many wives. I remember Moshoeshoe I had 33 wives, and all these wives produced a lot of sons for him. And these sons are the ones who became chiefs. These sons and their grandsons are the ones who occupied royalty. And we also came across the fact that the Basotho royalty rejected Christianity, and they were oriented towards tradition. And they also invested heavily into weaponry. In other words, we see an example of a people here who rejected Christianity as a modernizing tool, who rejected education as a modernizing tool, but who modernized through acquiring weapons. And if you look at the history of Basotho, you have the gun war, which they fought against the British. And the primary reason was the Basotho were arguing, those guns were not stolen. They did not steal them from the British. They bought them. They were legally acquired weapons. But of course, once you allow weapons to flood your society, you are militarizing the society. You are promoting what we call a gun culture. So that if you take a society like the Basotho and you talk of Africanizing, you have to ask yourself, in which direction? Because the main direction that the Basotho chose for themselves is through gun culture. They modernized through gun culture. Marginalized education, marginalized religion, and as a result, they ended up in a history full of wars. This is the point I made earlier, that if your government is dominated by the military, every problem becomes a military problem, and solutions come from that side, a military solution. And as a result, you end up with a lot of violence in such a society. Now we take another group, this one from Botswana, the Kalanga people, from which I come from. These are associated with the Zimbabwe ruins and so on. These are people who largely owned small stock, no cattle. Apparently, cattle are associated with warring communities. For you to keep cattle, you need a strong army, or you need to be heavily armed. This is what we saw in East Africa among the Maasai. By the way, these are people who believe when God was allocating resources to different communities, all the cattle of the world were given to them. And if they find another group owning cattle, it means they stole those cattle from the Maasai, and they attack them and steal their cattle. So you see, that's a culture of violence. But the Kalanga were owning small stock, and this links very well with the Kikuyu in Kenya. They also owned primarily small stock, and as a result, they were able to produce a peaceful culture of coexistence amongst themselves, and avoided wars with other groups. Like I say, cattle brought conflict more than small stock. So the Kalanga lived peacefully around the Southern Africa region until armed immigrants, the Ndebele, the Barotsi, and the Shona, they came in and dispossessed them, imposed themselves on them. And now the question becomes, if we Africanize, which Africanization are we talking about? The Africanization that was brought by the new armed immigrants, or the Africanization associated with the previous indigenous people who were conquered and displaced from their communities? We go on, and of course, because the Kalanga were a peaceful people, they easily disappeared. They ended up being absorbed by the Vanuatu, by the Shona, by the Ndebele, and so on. So that as we speak, the population of the Kalanga currently is a small minority in Zimbabwe, in Zambia, in Botswana. They are small minorities because they were conquered by better armed groups that had an economy based on cattle and violence. We move on. The Shona had a decentralized political system that was supported by huge armies that were used for raiding. And as a result, they devastated the Kalanga, and they also rejected Christianity until it was imposed on them during colonial rule. The Ndebele, like the Zulu, were centralized military groups. They were centralized military groups, and cattle were at the center of their state, and wars. They had to raid communities. If a disease came and wiped out their cattle, they go out and take cattle from other people to replenish their own. And when they invade other people, they not only steal their cattle, but displace them and destroy their culture as well. And of course, they were looking for population as well. You kill the men and take the women to go and produce new Zulu soldiers or new Ndebele soldiers. The Ndebele in particular, they came into Tswana societies, they came into Kalanga societies, they devastated them, take a lot of cattle, take a lot of women, take a lot of young people, and destroy the cultures of the indigenous people. So that when we look at colonization, it was not only from the European side and the Arabs. There were other Africans who colonized other Africans and destroyed their culture equally. I know sometimes people fail to understand. If the Ndebele are fighting the British, why would somebody African collaborate with the British? But if you were dispossessed by the Ndebele, and the British come and promise you that they will restore what was stolen from you by the Ndebele, there's nothing stopping you from colliding with the British. And of course, in Zimbabwe, we know this is the politics of sellouts. Anybody who is a collaborator is a sellout, no matter what happened in their history. So that even the history, it depends on who is writing it. African Ndebeles will write history in their favor. The Zulu Africans will write history in their favor. The Tswana historians will also write history in their favor, marginalizing other histories. So that when we talk of Africanization, we must be sensitive here of what we are dealing with. We should not just assume Tswana culture is the culture. There are other cultures that have been destroyed by the Tswana that are struggling to survive and need support from whoever is available there. Now, I wanted to give you the last example concerning the Tswana. The Tswana generally were people who had centralized political systems based on a cattle economy. But the cattle economy of the Tswana, because they were close to the center, to the Kalahari Desert, their cattle were kept in the desert. The Tswana have a culture of having cattle posted far away from the villages, so that in the olden days, when you attacked them, you would attack the villages, and you would not reach the cattle. For you to reach the cattle, you had to go into the desert to look for them, and this was a difficult terrain that helped the Tswana to preserve their wealth without powerful armies. So in other words, the desert here was used for defensive purposes, to shelter the wealth of the Tswana. And of course, the Tswana, among many African groups, they accepted Christianity. The Tswana chiefs, I remember Chief Chele of the Bakwena, he was told by the missionaries, for you to become a Christian, you must have one wife. And Chele had three wives, and he did not qualify to become a Christian. So Chele had to divorce his two wives and stayed with one to qualify as a Christian. That is a big sacrifice. That was a big sacrifice by a Tswana chief. Many other African chiefs, when they heard Christian religion requires you to have one wife, they said, I'm gonna go look for other people to convert. This religion of yours is too strict to accept. But the Tswana Chief Kama of the Bangwatu, for instance, he became a Christian when he was young, and you had history books talking about Kama the Great. He was called Kama the Great because his actions were pleasing the missionaries. He was imposing Christianity on his own people, on behalf of the missionaries. In other settings like South Africa, Zimbabwe, and elsewhere, missionaries were using settler power to impose Christianity. But among the Tswana, the chiefs were the ones who abolished Tswana religious practices, Tswana cultural practices, and accepted Christianity as the main religion of a state. By the way, every civilization needs a religion. If you don't have a religion, you have to rely on brute force to make people become under your control. But religion is a soft way of managing people without having to use force. So that even Africa, if you want to build united and peaceful African states, you need a religion. I've not come across a religion in Africa that we can say this is the religion that Africa should adopt, because it promotes unity, it promotes peace, and things like that. It promotes loyalty, because you need a religion. Every successful empire had a strong religion behind it. So I believe I've opened up the debate on decolonization, on Africanization, so that when we grapple with these issues, we are not only seeking to impose dominant African cultures on other people. We are also alert that there are other African cultures that are subjugated, that have no room for maneuver, that are struggling, and also need a voice. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.
Thank you, Prof, for the insightful presentation. I want to find out from colleagues, are there any questions, comments? Remember today our threading is curriculum development and how decolonization, internationalization, and Africanization impact curriculum development ultimately as points, and how curriculum development is being transformed within universities. Professor Dr. Malebu took a great deal of time explaining the different contrasts of internationalization versus decolonization and Africanization. And what came through is that we cannot solve or decolonize the curriculum overnight, but it is a process where we need to consider the different contexts of higher education, the current geopolitical environment. And she also made reference to VUCA world that we find ourselves in post-COVID, and how those are variables that do impact how curriculum is developed and the outcome or transformation of it. And Professor Peters also then touched on how the different historical backdrops influenced how curriculum is instructed and it's given, and what lessons we can learn from there. She took a great deal of time going through the definitions and the quotations of the importance of curriculum development. And Prof now was giving us a political perspective of how these three concepts have impacted society and how ultimately that translates into how higher education's core business of curriculum is then instructed. With those few points said, are there any questions from the audience? I'm looking in the chat box and I see a comment from Professor Makura. Before I read it, are there any hands, comments? Okay, I'm going to read this comment from Professor Makura at CUT. He says, the Kalanga are essential Shonas who emerged after the occupation of the eastern portion of present-day Western Zimbabwe was occupied by Ndebele and Zulu army. The Kalanga language is a mixture of Shona, Ndebele, and created after the occupation. The word Kalanga is a Zulu word implying those from the east or of where the sun, where it rises. This comment, and I'd like to throw it back to Professor Peters and Dr. Malebu and Professor Zibani. Yesterday, what came through was that language is also a contrast that we could use to Africanize. But then there was also a debate that came through, is that with Africa that has over 300 dialects or 3,000 dialects, which language of commonality can be used to truly Africanize us as a continent and truly Africanize our curriculum or higher education. Now, the question I think from this that can be posed to our panelists today is, when you are thinking of curriculum development and curriculum transformation, does language or languaging or translanguaging play a critical role in how you develop curriculum? Our panelists, that is one question, just to get colleagues stimulated. Dr. Malebu, Professor Peter, Professor Bani?
Yeah. Yeah, no, you will recall in my presentation, I referred to, having a curricula that allows access to disciplinary discourses. And this is where language plays a critical role. So we do understand that we have students whose, where you find that English is their third language, not even second language. So it is important for us to also bring, language to this particular conversation. It's a pity we didn't spend a lot of time on it, but I think there is a lot of work. I'm not a specialist in languages, but there is a lot of work that has been done. And I think also at basic education, there's also a drive in terms of ensuring that mother tongue is advocated for within the schools, because that's where you start your learning. So from our center, we are also driving a project where we are developing lexicons in certain disciplines. I think we started with civil engineering. We are almost done with biomedical technology, and next we'll be doing labor law. So some of the feedback that we've received from one of the faculties is that when the students start using the lexicons and the curriculum, it gives them access to the content and to also what they should be understanding about the discipline itself and their identity within the discipline. So I think that is a very transformative tool. But what it also does for the academics is that once the students start to get access to the knowledge, because now language unlocks that access, then they start questioning. And it's when the academics then realize that there is a lot that we need to start to change within our curriculum so that it reflects African realities. Because some of the examples are still, as I said, Western and not reflective of their realities as Africans who live in South Africa. So very important, the issue of language.
Thank you, Dr. Malebu. Professor Peters, what is your take on this? Professor Peter? Okay.
I'm
well,
here.
Professor.
Yeah, sorry, I'm here.
Okay.
I was talking to myself. So when I think of language and the linkages with the internationalization agenda and, all the constructs of decoloniality and transformation, I think of the intercultural aspects of language and how we can embed this in intercultural programs. It has a place. And also it can address issues of global competence. And I think some universities do this in terms of cultural immersions. I think even if we look at our counterparts, for example, a Chinese immersion program with the Confucius Institute, there's no reason why we can't embed this into our summer schools and short learning programs. And I know we're already working on some of these projects with your university. So I think this is a a good segue into embedding this into our programs in the intercultural aspects.
Thank you, Prof. Professor Zibani, what's your take on it? Prof? Professor Maudeni, what is your take on this? All right, well, Prof is loading. I see his mic is unmuted. Are there colleagues that would like to ask a question, put forth a comment? There's Prof. Prof, what is your take on, we are asking the importance, and you also made reference to that, of language and how language impacts curriculum development at the backdrop of what you've presented from a political science perspective of how Africanization, decolonization, and internationalization impacting the transformation of curriculum development. Prof, can you hear us? Prof, we can't hear you. I see you are speaking, but it is not coming through to us. Okay. Medzing, can you please assist Prof with the technical? While Medzing is assisting Prof, are there any other comments? Prof Makura, are you content, or do you want to add more to the dialogue that has taken place, understanding your comment that you put in the chat box? Okay, I see Professor Makura.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now, Prof. Yes.
Okay, I can go ahead.
Yes, Prof.
Okay. The issue of language, it goes together with political power. The most powerful groups, actually, maybe I should say history has favored not the peaceful groups, but the militarized groups. These are the groups that have been able to grow big, acquire bigger population, acquire bigger wealth, not only in Africa, but even in the world. So that the languages that are dominant in the world are associated with state power. The most powerful states at one time in history managed to export their languages. They managed to export colonies to go and colonize the rest of the world. Now, when you talk of the Kalanga language, particularly its meeting with the Shona came as a minority, and they made a state policy that no Shona man should marry a Kalanga as first wife. And of course, these are societies that promoted polygamy. Now, it was disallowed for any Shona man to marry a Kalanga as first wife, because if they did so, the chances are the children would speak Kalanga, the language from the mother. But the Kalanga women were married by Shona as second wife, third wife, fourth wife, and so on. So that by the time the second wife arrives, the language in the home is already Shona. And she joins the Shona language. Her children become Shona. As a result, Kalanganess dies away. The Shonaness is the one that gets promoted. In the case of Botswana, the Tswana absorbed a lot of displaced people who were running away from the Bele Wars. They were grouped by the Tswana to become new communities. And of course, the language of the Kuta, the language of the political assembly became Tswana. As a result, they were also channelized in some sense. So that language goes together with political power. Where the ethnic group is powerful and is able to impose itself on others, then its language becomes national language. The others, they simple disappear. So that we must understand language from a political point of view, that it does not, there's no natural language that can expand by itself. Either it expands through religion. We hear some Kalangas praying in Ndebele, for instance. When they're deep into religious terms, they speak Ndebele. So language can spread through religion, but also through political power. That's my comment.
Thank you, Prof. We are doing very bad for time. I'll take one more question from Spare over to you, and then I have to summate. Metsing, please unmute Spare. Spare is unmuted. It's mute. He's muted. Can you please unmute him?
Okay,
Thank
no,
you.
thank you. Thank you, Metsing, and I must apologize for speaking last, since within the context of decolonization, it's against our African cosmology for a child to speak last. And I think when discussing this issue again, I want to agree with the previous speakers, and I would love to dwell more on the fact that this issue of language has to do with power or political power or economic power to a great extent. For example, if you are going to try to decolonize education, for example, for engineers or engineering students who are based in the Eastern Cape, you might be talking to them about building a bridge so that people in cars can be able to cross a river for the sake of doing that. But now you might tend to forget or put aside, remember that now you're trying to decolonize their education by teaching them or training them on what is around them or what they are seeing on a daily basis. But now I do want to believe that in that process, you might miss an opportunity of helping them to catch up with the current developments within their space of operation or discipline. For example, already guys in the best performing engineering countries, such as your Indias, are already discussing mega structures about bridges. But now you will be sidelining these students who are being taught decolonization or decolonized engineering by building bridges that can just take you from point A to point Z without talking about the mega structures that are not around them. So I would believe that now you'd be disadvantaging them from being globally competitive. So I'm not sure if I'm making the right point, but I don't know how or what is the best way of understanding that within the decolonization project, who has more negotiating power and how do we play or negotiate better within that space for us being able to keep our identity and our traditions. I'm not sure if I'm making sense.
Thank you, Spare. I think you have really put across a good point. And I'm leaning towards perhaps asking either a willing participant from our panel to respond to that, and then we can summate and close off. We are already 15 minutes behind schedule. Professor Peter, Dr. Malebo, Professor Zibani, what is your take on the comment that has been made? Dr. Malebo? Please unmute Dr. Malebo. Metsing, please unmute Dr. Malebo.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. And I think I appreciate the comment. And I think we are mindful of issues around language and power. And I think what has been happening within the space of higher education in responding to how we can use language to gain access to the understanding within a discipline has focused on different languages. So for example, in universities where isiXhosa is predominantly spoken, then a lexicon project will focus on isiXhosa. And when we talk about lexicons, we look at difficult concepts within the discipline. So what we call threshold concepts that make it difficult for students to understand content within the discipline. So content is already developed, and all of our programs, I think I did share earlier, we do use national policy that requires us to also benchmark with other institutions globally, so that we ensure that as we respond to our local needs, we also respond to the global context. And I also made an emphasis in my presentation that at CUT, when we develop curricula, we also ensure that our students are globally competitive, that they are citizens that can work anywhere in the globe. So the intention of the lexicon project within CUT, and because Sesotho is predominantly spoken in the Free State, is to allow access to knowledge in the discipline. It does not limit the scope of where the discipline should go, but it's just to make some of the concepts that students might find very difficult within that particular discipline easier for them. So we don't only do the translation, but we go to an understanding of what does it mean, and we unpack. By the time we come and coin a Sesotho terminology for that equivalent within a discipline. For example, I'll make an example. If you think about biology, you will talk about or microbiology, you talk about translation. But in everyday language, when I speak to you and say, what is translation? You'll tell me it's, it's a process of converting one language to another. But in biology, translation means something completely different. So if I come into a classroom and I don't understand that translation is a process of protein synthesis, then I'm already lost, and I don't have access to that knowledge, and I'm excluded from what is happening in the classroom. So the intention of this project that we have is to allow access to disciplinary knowledge using language. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Malebo. I think that's a good summative point. Colleagues, I must be the bad one today and say that we have run out of time, unfortunately. We are exactly 20 minutes over our set time slot for the webinar series. And I have taken a lot from here, and I think colleagues have taken a lot. And as the director, CGE, said, we want to create a platform for this kinds of dialogues to take place. And CGE will continue trying to enable environments where we can have this kinds of dialogue taking place and it being more frequent. We are hoping that maybe soon in the coming year, in the early year, we'll put together, it seems like this topic is very burning. And there's so many other variables and factors to it that we need to go back to our drawing board and perhaps do another webinar where we expand on some of the issues that were touched on today. From my end, I have the sad pleasure of summing off today and wrapping up. Thank you to all the questions and comments that have been posed and to all the responses. And If possible, I know we are virtual, but can we please give a round of applause to our panelists for today? Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you so much. Colleagues, to our panelists, thank you so much for taking time out and sharing the wealth of knowledge that you have. And we are hopeful and asking that you continue becoming a resource to us, and we continue engaging and consulting you where we need to gather information and expertise and insight on the topic that we have discussed today, and other topics where you are also thought leaders in those fields. I think on behalf of CGE and CUT, we are truly honored that you have taken time out to prepare, to go through literature, to gather your thoughts and put them in a presentation. That is time, and that is effort, and that is a lot of dedication. And on behalf of our office, we are truly grateful for that. And we are grateful that you have chosen to be a resource for our office and center. Thank you so much, Dr. Malebu, Professor Peter, and Professor Sibani. And we'd also like to thank Mr. Jackson for allowing IAP to run these webinar series and allowing us to run with the topics that we have selected for 2022. We thank you for being a resource for us and a good guide and lead in this hard and difficult but exciting and world of internationalization, and us trying to make sure that our institution is internationalized comprehensively. So, Mr. Jackson, thank you. Colleagues, for coming and participating for the past 2 days, we would like to thank you. I see Prof. Jacobs is online. Professor Jacobs, thank you so much for your keynote yesterday. It really set the tone, and a lot was also referred to today from your discussion and your keynote from yesterday. Thank you so much for taking the time out to participate in our webinar series and to also present. We do appreciate all the effort and time that you have taken to participate in there. To the colleagues participating and joining in, we thank you for being friends and family of CGE. We would like you to continue being friends and family of CGE and CUT collectively, and continue this journey of internationalizing while considering and understanding the backdrops of decolonization and Africanizing. Colleagues, when I leave you with one notice. We will share all the presentations that were given after we have received confirmation from the speakers that we can share. We will share them via email. Thank you for participating, and thank you so much for being part of our webinar series. I'd like to leave you with a few words. It's a quotation by Bertrand Russell, and he says, "More important than the curriculum is the question of the methods of teaching and the spirit in which the teaching is given." And I think that has been discussed. Dr. Malebu came up with making clear that we understand that language there is a disciplinarity discourse that is taking place currently, and language is a good platform for us to start with. Professor Peters also alluded to some of the African realities that we need to look at, and the systematic changes or the systematic imperatives within society. And Professor Sibani then alluded to how language and other aspects of what we discussed within internationalization, decolonization and Africanization, that it sometimes is embedded within the political power, whether economic, whether social, whether geopolitical, but then there is a level of power dynamic that is involved in there. With those words, colleagues, I would really want to thank you for taking up time this morning and being with us until now. And we are truly hopeful that we will see each other in 2023. And we would be able to discuss now physically and see each other and engage. I was at the SOTO conference and the keynote said, sometimes it's better to be in front of people and discuss so that you can see the gestures and the body language and the expressions, because sometimes virtually does not really capture that. So we are very excited about our activities for next year and our activities for this year and what we've achieved thus far. On behalf of the IAP unit, and I see my director is up. Would you like to say something, Mr. Jackson, before we close off?
Yeah, no, definitely not wanting to say a lot. The first thing is, I don't know whether we've taken a picture of all the delegates and the panelists that have presented us. So I would like Met Singh and whoever's behind the scenes to do that. But just from my side also, it's been a stimulating engagement, and I think that's what we need to have at universities. I also take note of what Dr. Malebo had said. These are erudite scholars within their own fields, and we really, really, truly appreciate what you've done today. You've given us food for thought, but it doesn't have to stay just food for thought. We'll have to find the implementers, and we'll have to make it work for CUT and for the institutions where you are also. So once again, Rafil, I'm going to hand back to you so that we can take the picture and then you can sign off. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Colleagues, my favorite part, can we please put our cameras on and have our beautiful Sensodyne, Colgate, Aquafresh, and herbal toothpaste smiles out and allow us to take a group picture. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, colleagues. All right, now we are going for it. Thank you, colleagues. Okay, we are going to count you down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Happy Family Week, all smiles. And the picture is taken. Colleagues, thank you so much. We are 30 minutes away from lunch. Enjoy your lunch and enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your week. Until we meet again next year, thank you, colleagues, and goodbye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
A recibir diferentes.